All right, so SQL to JSON. So we're going to move out of the cloud space. We're going to move into the JavaScript space. So just real quick about me. So like Matt, I am a former president of OKC SQL. I actually co-founded the group in 2009 with Rob Sullivan, and I was president of the group from 2009 to 2014 and was speaker coordinator for SQL Saturday Oklahoma City for several years when Matt was chairing that. And actually, Matt and I conferences are really awesome events. 200 OK that was just being spoken about. Matt Breimer met Rob Sullivan and I at SQL Saturday Dallas 2010. And that's how we met. And he was like, hey, we'd love to do a SQL Saturday Oklahoma City. And I was like, that's great. Rob and I don't really have time to do anything more than our jobs and run the group. And so Matt's like, hey, well, I could become an officer in OKC SQL, and I could chair the event, and I could use my LLC to actually sign paperwork related to the event. So conferences like the technology groups can be really great opportunities to meet people. I've been in the technology community actually since 2003. I'm a freelancer right now. I do software development and BI development. I'm actually based out of here in Starspace. I am the owner and lead developer for Ferrier Solutions. But my last corporate job that I had, I actually got based upon relationships from this community. So the relationships that I kind of tell people, the Techlahoma community conference is not just about what you're going to learn at that one session. It's about the relationships that you have. My corporate job before that actually came from a relationship in the community. It was actually from a recruiter that worked at one of the staffing firms and then moved to Devon Energy, and she was a recruiter there, and I basically got to speed past her almost, immediately to interview phase because of that. So the relationships that you can build when you hear about conferences, a lot of really great people, and they're either free or they're really inexpensive and put together by a lot of really amazing people. So even if you're not totally familiar with the technology, if you're interested in it, Jesse Harlan, who's co-founder of Techlahoma and former president of Techlahoma, we met him, Rob Sullivan and I met him like in 2010 at a free SQL Server BI boot camp that someone was putting together in the evenings with my co-tech. He was asking really cool questions. I went up and started talking to him. That's how his relationship with me and Rob Sullivan began. I think that's actually how his connection to this community came. And then he became one of the co-founders of Techlahoma. So the relationships, I think, are, to me, more than half of what you can get out of these relationships. And it's not people trying to sell you stuff. It's people that want to build real, genuine relationships, help you learn things that can help you in your career. So that's kind of the thing. The two big conferences that Techlahoma has is 200 OK, that's a web developer conference. Then there's going to be Thunder Plains later this year. It's going to be a JavaScript conference. Those are like the two of the most premier conferences in Oklahoma related to development. So if you're doing any kind of web development or any kind of JavaScript development, or you're interested in getting into those, and you know people, those are really the two premier conferences to go to. 2 years ago, I met someone from Seattle at the Thunder Plains conference. I was like, oh, okay, so you work for Cisco? Like, how'd you end up at this conference? She's like, oh, well, a couple of times a year, I just get to pick a really cool conference to go to. And Thunder Plains has like an international reputation, and it's here in Oklahoma City. And so these conferences that you hear about connected to Techlahoma, they are really amazing conferences. So we used to have some SQL Saturdays here in Oklahoma City. We haven't had the resources to put those together. So that's kind of my spiel on Techlahoma, a little bit more on that. Social media, I am very active on Twitter, and I'm very active on the Techlahoma Slack. So SQL Energy is my Twitter handle, and Energy Dev is my Slack handle. If you're not familiar with Slack, it is basically a persistent IM messaging system. And basically for Techlahoma, Twitter and Slack, those are the two main media presences for Techlahoma and the main players in Techlahoma. So that's just a little bit more on that. So let's go ahead and talk about SQL to JSON. So real quick, who here has done anything with JavaScript ever? Okay. Who here is familiar with JSON at all? Okay, several people. A lot more that I was surprised on. So we're going to talk about some overlap between JSON and SQL Server, and one of the features you can use in SQL Server to interact with JSON. And we'll do a really super high-level overview of JSON for those that aren't familiar, and also those that may watch this later. So JSON is data. That's really the biggest thing. JSON is data. And it's data in the form of JavaScript object with stricter rules, like a string must be enclosed in quotation marks. So that's basically it. JSON's data. So if you're scared of JSON in any way, it's basically data. And it's really common for web applications to be talking to web APIs in the form of JSON, sending JSON and receiving JSON. I'm doing some work recently in Dialogflow with Google Mini Home. And basically, once it gets through interpreting what you want, it sends JSON to a webhook, and then the webhook sends JSON back. So JSON's, if you're not familiar with JSON and you're in the data space at all or developer space, definitely want to get familiar with JSON. So here's an example of what JSON looks like. Basically, I have quotes, basically because I was working on TNT, the librarians, quotes generator recently, and I put together a big JSON file of quotes that included librarians and Star Wars and Doctor Who, and I got online and asked people what their favorite quotes were. So that's why it's actually quotes. And basically, in SQL Server 2016 and later, you have the for JSON auto and the for JSON path. And it can basically take your SQL results set and basically turn it into JSON for you, either in an automated format or you can customize the structure. And that's what we're going to look at here. And we've got a demo on SQL Fiddle. Was there a question? Okay. Yeah. Demo on SQL Fiddle. Can you guys see SQL Fiddle? Excellent, excellent. Okay. So if you're not familiar with SQL Fiddle is basically, you could take this link yourself from the slides that I will tweet later. You could go to this link and you could start playing around and you would have your own sandbox of dealing with SQL. There's also MySQL, I think Postgres, and a couple other playgrounds. So if you want to play around with SQL Server and all these other different databases, you can come to SQL Fiddle. You don't even have to install, you don't have to pay for anything, and you can just start playing around with these systems. So I already created a franchise table and a character table and a quotes table, and we're going to look at 3 different results that you can get back. So first, let's go ahead and see what the SQL would look like in a SQL query. So here's the results right here. Just quote, franchise name, character name, quote text. You want to turn that into JSON? Just add for JSON auto. And there's the results that you have. Now there's actually a prettier way to look at it. So in Firefox, and you can take JSON, put it into a JSON file. And if you open it in Firefox, it'll show it to you in a really pretty format. So here's essentially the format that we have here. Now this gave us 2 different quotes, and we've got a quotes level, and then each quote has a franchise, and then each franchise has a character. Well, maybe your developers want everything flat. And so that's really easy to do. Get back to SQL Fiddle. And you can say for JSON path, but not do any aliasing. And then now, it's going to flatten things out for you. You see that there's no aliasing of franchise or F, and that would be quotes 2 that we have right here. And another thing to note about for JSON is that you can do all sorts of things that you want in the structure. So if you were to start adding aliases and start putting like info dot instead of it, then info would become its own level. So there's you can do all sorts of customization. We've just got one more customization since this is a lightning talk that we're going to go into here. And this is if you wanted to have a root level quotes. So it's the exact same query, just with root quotes. You can run the SQL. It's taking a moment. Now you can see there's root level quotes. So there's the prettier version of it, the exact same. And literally, when I put this presentation together and I got those 3 result sets, put them into JSON files, and that's what we're looking at here. So now it's called quotes. So you can do basically all level of customization that you want. Now, also with 2016, that's outside the scope of this presentation detail-wise, is there's all sorts of other really cool things you can do with JSON built in with SQL Server 2016. So there's all sorts of reading and updating of JSON data that you can do in SQL Server. Now, they don't have a JSON data type like you might see in Postgres. And I read the reason behind that is that apparently developers prior to SQL Server 2016 were already storing data, basically JSON data as text in, for example, in varchar columns. So they didn't want to basically say, oh, you have to use this new JSON data type. So basically, you can take JSON data, you can put it in an varchar column and do all sorts of reading and manipulation of it. And that's outside the scope of this talk. So this talk was basically to show kind of an example of how SQL Server and JSON kind of overlap with each other. The for JSON is an example of how you can automatically create JSON data, which is actually in the quotes generator that I was doing. I basically got an Excel spreadsheet of all my quotes, saved it as CSV, imported it into a table, and then queried it as for JSON. And then I had a JSON file that basically is the source of all my quotes for my quotes generator that I have. So, and that's actually, if you go to my Twitter, I actually have a link to that where you can see me playing around with that. So that's pretty much the core presentation. I think the final slide's like a thank you slide. Basically, you can catch up with me on Twitter and Slack. I'm active in both those places. I'll say probably the next couple of months, I'm going to have a lot more availability to kind of help people out in the community. And then I'm going to be really ramping up hardcore on the consulting and not probably have as much availability. So if you're getting into stuff right now and you have questions, reach out to me and I'm happy to help you out. I'm also on one of the committees for Techlahoma, so if you have any questions about Techlahoma or anything like that, definitely reach out to me. Any questions on anything I talked about this? This was a much smaller subset of data. John's giving me an interesting look. Plus, you have my phone number. You can just text me later. All right, thanks, guys.